Welcome to this special broadcast. Normally, we broadcast our podcast in the evening, but we're doing a special news update for you guys just this morning. We were going to go live last night in talking about the attack from Iran on Israel, but we wanted to wait until the dust had settled a bit and some of the information was a bit more solid. So, for those who are unaware, a war which has basically been fought in the shadows for decades has finally come into the light as Iran launched a massive attack on Israel yesterday evening in response to the killing of two generals from an Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Syria a few days ago. And this attack consisted of, reports differ, but around 185 suicide drones, 110 ballistic missiles, and 36 land cruise missiles. These arrived in Israel at somewhere around 2 a.m. yesterday in the morning, Israeli time. And we've seen that 99% of the missiles and drones were shot down by a combined force of the IDF air defense, the Iron Dome, the RAF, US jets, also with help from Jordan and the Saudis and France as well. And Mark and Richard, what else is going on that people should know about?
Yeah, first of all, the scale of the attack and the unprecedented nature of it, because it came directly from Iran. Now, we always known that Iran was acting through proxies, lately, especially Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. But this time they actually retaliated, so-called retaliated from because of the attack, as you said, on the consulate in Damascus in Syria. And the only issue here is that the scale of the attack was absolutely massive. As you said, 331 objects thrown at Israel. Luckily, this could have been a totally different podcast. We could find ourselves today talking about lots of casualties. Luckily, as I said, we've seen a great performance of the defense system of the Israel and the performance of the combined forces are trying to down the rockets, much of which have been destroyed before they actually reach Israel. However, few explosion and shrapnels damage, I think, in a minor way, an army base in Israel. And in the south of the country, a 7-year-old girl was hit by shrapnel. So luckily, no serious casualties, apart from, of course, this little girl who's not going to be any better for this. However, yes, it could have been much worse. However, it also shows, as you said, the intent of Iran. This is a proof that Iran is just trying to destabilize the area.
Yeah, I think that I would describe this as a partial success for Israel's self-defense. Now, why am I so harsh? Because this is a massive, impressive display of self-defense in terms of stopping the rockets as they cross into Israel and in shooting down the drones and ensuring that 99% of them didn't land at all. And that is obviously, as even Biden is calling that, that's remarkable, that's impressive. But leaving self-defense to the last moment when your rockets enter your territory and not preemptively attacking the source of where those rockets are being fired from, where those missiles are being fired from. So this is partial because the second part of that self-defense is now absolutely necessary. It's been brought clearly to light that Israel needs to take out the threat that Iran poses and its proxies pose to its security in the future, and not rely on however impressive its defenses are in the sky, in the air. It cannot rely on those. It should be ensuring that the source of the threat is removed as much as is feasible. And that's, I think, what Marco mentioned there, that we could be having a very different podcast here. And the nature of the number of casualties, the fact that there aren't casualties within Israel, aside from the Bedouin girl that Marco referred to there, the nature of the fact that there are so limited, that there are no casualties, no deaths involved in this, means that people will say, well, there's proportionality will come into it. They'll start treating it as a body count and saying, well, therefore you don't need to go against Iran. You don't need to kill anyone in Iran. You don't need to attack at all because you didn't suffer any deaths. Well, that is totally the wrong way to look at it, because what actually happened last night, the outcome of what happened last night, is secondary to the intent of the nation firing 300 objects at you. That is the important factor, not how many people subsequently die from those 300 objects. The fact that 300 are fired at you in anger, as a direct threat. I think that should be remembered, particularly as we're already hearing the words that we're going to be pulling apart in a minute, no doubt. Words like escalation and well, we'll get to that.
And as well, the attack wasn't only launched from Iran. No doubt, if anyone's been looking at Twitter, you've probably seen some of the videos. Which, and again, although the dust has settled a little bit, there is still a fair bit of conflicting information about certain things. We were mentioning some of the numbers there, but people are reporting some different numbers, so people should just be aware of that. But if you look at Twitter, there are videos of huge rocket launches coming from Iran and some video coming out of Israel as well of the Iron Dome shooting those down. Missiles were also launched by some reports, the Houthis, some coming from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and there was somewhere else. Oh, some from proxies in Iraq as well, by some reports. And I think what's heartening to some extent in the reporting is the cooperation from other nations. Now, given the US and the UK's wobbly support of Israel in recent months, it was very good to see that the US and the UK were launching jets, the RAF coming from Cyprus. But not only that, the fact that Jordan and the Saudis were getting involved as well, I think took a lot of people by surprise, but is very good to see. And some people are even pointing out that this is actually the first time that America and Israel have fought side by side, so to speak, against the common enemy, which has been very good. I wanted to ask you guys what you thought, if you've seen the governmental response, because Biden, Rishi Sunak, David Cameron put out their statements, and some good things, I guess we could say, and some negative things as well. What did you guys make of those?
Yeah, well, it's the same kind of copy and paste diplomacy we've seen after October 7th. The first few minutes is all in support of Israel and very soft condemnation of Iran. And then, but we know that very soon that this support will fade away. Also, I find particularly hypocritical the support coming from nations who've just reinstated the funding for UNRWA, the funding for Hamas. So, you can say what you want, but it's actually your action that back up what you really think about things. I just want to go back to the attack itself. As you said, it came from at least 4 different points. And those 4 different points are effectively showing where Iran's influence is coming. Is affecting the area effectively. We already know that Hezbollah is funded by Iran. We already knew that the Houthis were under the control of Iran. And this, again, is another proof that as soon as the Houthis started causing trouble from Yemen in the Straits and the Red Sea, we should have intervened straight away. Again and again, we see that our cowardice, the Western reluctance to stand up for its own interest and support and protect its own interest comes back and bites us in the ass. Again, we've been lucky that this time Israel was able to fight back all the drones and the various missiles, but you just need to be unlucky 2 or 3 times. If you had a failure of any kind at any point, you probably would have seen lots of civilian casualties. And going back to this point as well, we talk about proportionality. Well, Israel surgically destroyed the consulate in Damascus to hit military targets. And what do the Iranians do? They send out hundreds of missiles, drones, and whatever to try and destroy the population in Israel. How targeted was that? How proportional was that? Proportionality only is it's talked about when Israel is defending itself, but never when it's attacked. And that's another proof of how much the rest of the world is really against Israel as such, and certainly not supporting it.
And whilst celebrating the success, or at least remarking on the success of the defense capability of Israel, we shouldn't at the same time wipe out the nature of what last night must have been for Israelis living across Israel, in bomb shelters overnight, seeing sirens overnight, knowing that there are hundreds of objects flying through the sky at them, and across, it seemed to be targeting across Israel. We saw some Israeli television early in the small hours where all of the thing on the right hand side of the screen, which indicates all the sirens for the different, all the warnings, the bomb warnings for all the different areas of the city were areas of the country were huge in number. So clearly it would have been a truly terrifying experience, knowing how widespread it was and how no one was potentially safe from the consequences of it. And just because the outcome of that particular night is successful, we shouldn't suddenly wipe that out and ignore it and expect Israelis to act as if nothing has happened whatsoever. Because something very, very significant has happened. And that does include the things that you were talking about there in terms of the Jordanians shooting down drones that came across their airspace. Now, there's various ways you can look at that. For example, you can look at the fact that if they didn't shoot them down, they then do, in a sense, become complicit in an attack on Israel, because the stuff will be passing through their airspace and they'd just be watching it pass through. They've also got every legitimate right to shoot down, unidentified objects of threat within their own airspace anyway. And it's well known that Iran would also like to overtake the Kingdom of Jordan at any point that it could anyway. So it's also got a vested interest in making sure that it demonstrates to the Iranians that it has the capability of stopping and the willpower to stop such attacks. So, but what I think is interesting about what last night reveals is it reveals how there is a shifting geopolitics within the Middle East, how different countries are allying together, either officially or unofficially. There's a sense that Jordan would certainly have spoken to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and coordinated how it was going to respond. And you're seeing that whilst the populations of some of these countries are often on the side of Iran because of the Muslim rhetoric. And I think it's important. Well, every time we talk about Iran, people always drop the Islamic Republic of Iran, particularly in the West when they're talking about it. And I think it's necessary that once in a while we do mention the full title of the country, because that is integral to its identity as a theocratic dictatorship. So just making the point that the difference between their governments and the populations, sometimes some of those governments are appeasing their own populations in terms of being aware of what they think, but also they're keen to protect their own assets, particularly among the richer Arab nations who have been, relatively successful in developing their countries, and they don't wish to lose that. And that, of course, is the best defense that Israel has. So even if this alliance is temporary, even if it's based on not exactly full support for Israel, but rather a pragmatic support for now for Israel, it's at least revealing people's cards a little bit and showing where their true priorities lie.
Yes, and in terms of the enemies kind of clubbing together as well, something which I think went a bit underreported was that not only was Iran using these drones yesterday, but yesterday Russia used Iranian drones against the Ukrainians as well. And so that, they're not only are people allying against Iran, but Russia is also strengthening its ties. Jan was just telling me that there's an Israeli brigadier general who's trying to estimate the cost of the defense last night, and he's saying the defense tonight was on the order of 4 to 5 billion shekels, which is over $1 billion US. So it's an enormous cost to do this kind of thing. And now, of course, they need to do that, but it's the kind of defense that can't be kept up ad infinitum. So the Israelis really do have to do something about that. And just since we're talking about money, let's not forget that I think it was in early March that Biden basically unfroze about $10 billion worth of assets to Iran in a kind of sanction relief. So I wonder whether he's going to apologize for that now. And so then leading on from that in terms of the governmental response, the statements which were coming out of the US and UK political leaders were fairly uniform. Clearly, I think showing consultation with their communications directors. Biden and Kamala Harris both saying very similar kind of things, that their support for Israel was ironclad. That was the kind of phrase that came out amongst all of their statements about the support being ironclad. And then Sunak and Cameron saying that they condemned the attack, but notably both of their statements also said that the attack from Iran was reckless. Now, although I think people might, if you go read their statements, might take that as a good thing because they're declaring support for Israel, the fact that the main point of critique against Iran was that the attack was reckless, I thought telegraphed such weakness. Because it's not a matter of recklessness or of risky escalation, which is really the main thing here, is that this is a completely evil and brutal thing to have done, to launch such a massive attack upon Israel. And I mean, and that leads into the broader point as well, which is that the response from people. So I've been up all night, for people who don't know, watching people's response on Twitter. And although there was a big outpouring of support for the Israelis, which is good and which is encouraging, the usual suspects, unfortunately, trotted out the line which I think you'd expect them to trot out, which is Israel brought this on themselves. So we saw people like Owen Jones saying that. Owen Jones was also saying that Netanyahu was deliberately instigating this war so as to distract from the failings in Gaza and because to distract from his own failings as a leader. Ash Sarkar, a luxury communism journalist in the UK, if people don't know her, was saying that what else would you expect any government to do if a country launched an attack on a US embassy, which it wasn't an embassy, it was a consulate, but if a country launched an attack on a US embassy, surely we would expect the US to launch an attack likewise. And then very, very disappointingly, and I'm not really surprised anymore, notable people on the American right saying the same thing. Now, disgusting anti-Semites who you'd expect it from, like Jackson Hinkle, posting photos of him smoking a cigar and flipping the bird at the camera saying, fuck Israel. Excuse me for swearing, but that's what he said. And that he stands with Iran. He actually said that. But even just more mainstream American conservatives saying that, this is leading us into World War III. Biden shouldn't be getting involved. This would have never happened under Trump. All this kind of stuff. So across the right and the left, a very, very disgusting either displays of weakness from people who are kind of complaining about any military action that's going on, or just openly saying that Israel brings it on themselves, which is what we've seen in so much commentary on the whole conflict. But it's just unbelievable to see an attack of this scale, and all that people can do is blame the people upon who are being attacked. And I think it also shows the cardinal sin in people's thinking, if you like, which is of moral equivalence. So if you think about Ash Sarkar saying, well, if this happened to the US, of course you would expect them to do this kind of thing, so it's understandable. Anything the Iranian government does, anything, is illegitimate because they're an evil, brutal dictatorship, a theocratic dictatorship. They have no right to do anything, let alone a right of self-defense. And as I said earlier that this is a war which has been fought in the shadows, which has come out into the light. And I say that because Iran has never launched a direct attack on Israel, but has been attacking Israel and the West more broadly for decades through its proxies. So through Hezbollah, through Hamas, which is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, through the Houthis. They fund, they train, and they arm these people so that they don't have to get directly involved. And it's a big development that they've taken direct action. But they have the only governments which have a right to take that kind of action are legitimate rights protecting governments. You can't have this kind of moral equivalence where you don't have any judgment about the legitimacy of the government in taking that kind of attack. And that's especially prevalent on the left, but as I say, it was prevalent amongst conservatives as well, which is just a real sign of the tribalism and also in a way, I think the 20th century anti-war movements were very, very successful in making even conservatives who are thought of as being pretty hawkish, very, very reluctant or very suspicious of any military action per se. They don't want to know about it. They don't want to get involved. And that is just a sign of rolling over and showing your soft underbelly, because military action has to be taken at certain times. But what else did you guys think?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, the kind of response we've seen, for example, from as you pointed out, is roughly the same across the board in the West. But the kind of response we've seen from David Cameron, for example, and the British government is exactly the kind of spineless, morally sold out diplomacy and foreign policy we've been seeing for the last 20 years, where you effectively accept Iran's response as valid in response to the attack on the consulate. But let's make it clear, the Israel didn't attack the consulate because they felt like it. They attacked in response of the continuous attack that Israel is under, funded by Iran from Hezbollah and the Houthis, especially in the last few months, which we've seen, as I said earlier on, attacking our interests, and we let them get away with it. A bunch of, camel traders are effectively holding half of the population hostage because we haven't got the balls to actually deal with them. You raised another point about, Richard raised a point about this shift in attitude in the area. It looks to me like there is a bit more alignment between the Sunni and the Shiites. Of course, Iran is the big Shiite power in the Middle East. And it looks like Jordan and Saudi Arabia are kind of moving slightly away from them, being a bit less tolerant. But this doesn't mean that the West should go behind them. These are not our allies. Supporting Jordan is still supporting somebody who wants to destroy civilization as we know it, to be honest. And even if in this particular case they helped us, it doesn't mean that we're going to have to give them billions and help them with weapons and create the same situation over and over again we've done in the past by helping our common, by helping somebody which we consider a friend because we have a common enemy. That's hopefully not what we're going to be doing. We kind of see a bit of that happening from, I think, 95 when Israel created a peace with Jordan after the previous decades events. But we really shouldn't start aligning ourselves with people who are not our friends. And then the problem with Iran has been exacerbating from 2015 by the Democrats. Obama, when his administration signed a deal with Iran to allow them enrichment of uranium and allow them the owning of centrifuges, which allow them to produce enriched uranium, that was a massive mistake. We should have never gone down the route. And I'm frankly glad that 3 years later, Trump actually stopped the whole deal, which was a totally sellout of Israel in a way, because you allow Iran to produce nuclear weapons. And what do you think they're going to do with it? They don't want nuclear power. They don't want uranium to generate electricity. They got more oil than they can do and use. So the only reason that they want to obtain uranium is to cause trouble and to be a superpower in the area and take over all the other Islamic nations.
Yeah, there's so much I want to respond to, but what both of you have just said to reinforce and piggyback off your points there. But in terms of what Jordan did and not overly treating Jordan as a friend thereafter, as Marco was pointing out there, you also don't want to be trading or negotiating an attack on Rafah that's necessary in order to defeat Hamas. Saying you won't do that if the Jordanians help you, for example, or if whatever might be happening behind the scenes. You can't be trading your right to defend yourself, either morally, unspoken, or officially behind the scenes. I think that's important. I think your point, Morgan, about embassies being attacked and what Ash Sarkar and people like that were saying, but there's the same people don't take the same attitude when an American embassy is attacked, particularly in the Middle East or whatever. They're instantly saying you can't retaliate. So there is definitely a hypocrisy there, and the hypocrisy reveals the real principled thinking or that they have, the fact that they are very much on the side of an anti-Western side, an anti-freedom side, anti-capitalism side. I think that the term reckless is particularly telling, as you point out, because reckless suggests careless, emotional, ill thought through, random. You do something reckless and then you instantly regret it. When they don't regret it, they intended to do it. They coordinated the attack. They did it with lots of other sources and countries from lots of different places all at once. They ensured that the timing of it, in terms of when the drones arrived, when the ballistic missiles and the cruise missiles arrived, in order to try and overwhelm the defenses and get past the radar. This is anything but reckless. This is a military operation that was intended to succeed and did not cause the casualties and destruction that it was set out to. So, and of course, reckless suggests it was a one-off. It was, and it's not necessarily a one-off. They've already threatened to do it again. And of course, the threat always exists and has existed every time they've used a proxy. What's significant here is this reveals for definite that Iran is behind it. And nobody can say, as people often do, that, oh, how do you know the Iran is behind the Houthis? How do you know, all of that is put to bed with the events of last night. And to any thinking mind, it was put to bed a long time ago. It was pretty obvious a long time ago. But yet another piece of fluff falls away when analysed against reality. I think in terms of other words that are being used, like escalation, I want to say a word about that, because that's such a subjectless word all the time. That's an evaluative judgment that asks people to zoom back, take everything out of focus, and just say all things are getting worse and getting worse is bad. It limits the time scale to the getting worse being right now, and we want to stop it right now. It doesn't look at a time scale where things are better for longer. And the only way to make things better for longer is to punish the aggressor, to ensure that he cannot be an aggressor again, to punish the bully. I think the analogy of the bully is quite an important one, because it's like people saying, for example, I don't want violence in my school, but we mustn't punish bullies. Well, if you're going to do that, all you're going to end up with is more bullying and more bullies and more violence, despite your call for the effect that there to be less violence, without being willing to instigate the cause of that, which is clamping down on bullies and making sure they aren't in a position to bully you again. That is the route out of this. You can't just encourage people to just walk away, and come back tomorrow for another beating. That is not going to work.
I wanted to pick up something about the word reckless. To me, using that word betrays the fact that they're quite happy for Iran to retaliate because of the consulate, but they're just effectively slapping them on the wrist for being a bit too much. But they are quite happy for Iran to have attacked Israel.
Yeah, I did. The fact that it was so coordinated amongst their statements as well, very clearly they sat down with their comms people and decided this is the right term to use, presumably believing it strikes the right kind of tone, whereas I think it does exactly the opposite. So we have a couple of super chats. By the way, guys, if you want to, we're going to keep this a bit summary this morning, but if you want to keep us going, then if you send in any questions you have, any super chats, we can keep going, or you can save them up for later. TRS Extra today for YouTube channel members has been cancelled, and James and Razi are going to do an extra special long episode of the Daily Objective talking about the same thing. So you can, if you don't want to send them this morning, you can send them later on. And so we have a 99 cent from Bonnie. Thank you, Bonnie. And 2.9 shekels from True Voice. Thank you so much. On the nuclear weapons, I think it's extraordinary that this whole affair with Iran and nuclear enrichment has gone on for so long. I mean, I can't remember whether they were specifically talking about Iran, but I remember, I think back in 2009 on the Bill Maher show, Christopher Hitchens and is it Mos Def were having an argument about this. It might have been with one or the other. Islamic states, but I think it might be Iran, where Mostef was making the typical kind of line, which is actually, again, very common today, that if we don't want them to develop nuclear weapons, we need to give up our own, like extraordinarily. And then Hitchens really puts him in his place, where saying, do you want to live in a world where an Islamic republic, which is bent on seeing the world submitted to its style of politics, is armed with a nuclear weapon? Because if we don't do anything about this, then we'll see that. And that was basically what I said to one of these American conservative guys on Twitter last night, who was saying that American interests aren't under threat from this attack on Iran. And I think to have that perspective, you either have to know nothing about this and the history of Iran and its hostility, or you really have to have your head buried in the sand. Because Iran, for Iran to achieve its goals, the eradication of Western countries and Western liberalism, Western style democracy, let's say, that's a bit of a vague term, is what they would want to achieve. And if they can achieve the status of being a nuclear power, I mean, that's very clearly what they want. And for Obama to have thought that he could get through it by negotiating and striking this deal is just foolish, and is clearly not been achieved. And if we should ever live in a world where Iran is a nuclear power, then that will be a very, very frightening world to live in. And we just absolutely cannot allow that to happen. And then on what you were saying about the response from people and the comparison to bullying, I mean, I think the whole response from Ash Sarkar and Owen Jones, and even from the Conservatives, is just an attitude of appeasement. These would have been the people who in 1940 were telling Churchill that, he needs to strike a peace deal with Hitler. And I mean, there's that great scene in Darkest Hour where Churchill's responding to Halifax. So I think he's saying that very same thing. And he says, you can't argue with a tiger when you've got your head in its mouth. And that's very true. And what people seem to want to avoid is that once violence has been brought to you, then you can't just avoid that. You can't pretend it's not there. You need to do something about it. And Iran developing a nuclear weapon is very much doing that kind of thing. And to act otherwise, or to say that Israel brought this on themselves, or, well, these two sides are morally equivalent, and so Iran's justified in doing that, is just appeasement. It seemed for a long time like appeasement was out of vogue, but even though they're not saying that we should appease Iran, that's very much the effect of what they're saying. And I think these people need to be called out in exactly those terms, as filthy, low appeasers. And they shouldn't be taken seriously anymore. And something else that was going around was a video of a pro-Palestine protest that was going on, where people were holding signs calling for a ceasefire. And then a guy picks up a loudspeaker and says, I just want to make an announcement. The Islamic Republic of Iran has launched an attack on Israel, and you should see the people jump up and down and celebrate and cheer for it. So there are people in our own societies, not who are just appeasing, but who are openly celebrating that this is happening. And we need to be very, very worried about that and take that very, very seriously. And then just in terms of the super chats we have, does code giving $1 New Zealand dollar. Thank you very much. And then Bonnie, $2 saying, has Israel said what its response will be, if any? I think I saw something about that, but Mark and Richard, what did you see?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a number of meetings taking place later on in the day, one of which will be the G7 response to the attack. What I would like to say a couple of words about what kind of response Israel should take now. This is not tit for tat. This is an open statement from Iran, partially perhaps because it's finding itself a bit in the Ayatollah and the Islamic mob effectively are finding themselves a bit in trouble in their own country. So perhaps they also wanted to have a display for the benefit of their own population, showing how committed and how strong they are. But whatever the reason, I hope Netanyahu has learned from October the 7th, when you have a very small, narrow window to retaliate, and you have to be absolutely determined to to achieve your objective within the little small window when a good chunk of the world is not against you, not so openly against you. So I think what they should do, they should use this chance to take out every single nuclear facility in Iran and destroy as many of the facility of the what's it called, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Take out as many military facilities as they can, and effectively set back the ability of Iran to cause trouble for another 10 years. If you totally destroy, annihilate every single facility that can produce uranium, you buy yourself another 20 years, during which you can then regroup and then decide exactly which action to take. If they don't do that at this point, we're going to be back in a few months' time, perhaps this time with drones, with dirty bombs on it or whatever, or even nuclear capability. And I just hope that the lesson from October 7th, from the post-October 7th, have been learned by Israel. Frankly, that would probably require some intervention from the US as well. But intervention against Iran, as I said at the opening, should have been granted by the action of the Houthis in the first place. The Houthis are sponsored by Iran, so Iran was effectively attacking Western interests way before the attack on Israel. So there's no reason why we shouldn't go back and flatten all those facilities, which incidentally were provided by Russia. As you said earlier on, Iranian missiles were used against Ukraine because not long ago, Iran actually gave a stash of drones and missiles to Russia.
Yeah, I think there's a number of points in there. I think the fact that these drones and that came over Israel could well have had chemical weapons on them or other things that, it could have been so much worse, and that doesn't mean it won't be worse next time. So why are you waiting for next time? The need to attack the nuclear facilities and disable them as soon as possible in a safe and efficient way as possible is necessary. I'm not too interested in what Israel says it's going to do right now. It's not a speech you need from Netanyahu. It's the action of its military forces, and it's the blowing up of Iranian and military capability that we need to see. And I don't much care if that happens before discussion with the US. I think it should be done first, whilst that, as Marcus said, that narrow window is when the global condemnation of the attack on Israel is still at least fresh in people's minds, even if it lasts only as long as a press release from each of the countries that are temporarily offering their support to Israel. I think the Iranian population themselves and the government themselves, those are interesting factors in this. Whether this acts as a humiliation for Iran, the fact that 99% of its capability that it launched last night was defeated, that effectively it didn't achieve anything, whether that plays within the Iranian population, whether there's enough support within Iran, within those people who are, fighting back against the morality police, whether those that would like to see Iran return to how it was back in the 70s, when it was much more free before it was taken over as a theocracy, whether any of that will start to happen, because regime change is necessary here, and anything which any countries in the West, Israel and its allies, can do in order to prod the Iranian population in order to rise up against their dictatorial leadership, I think should be encouraged right now. Even though that's it's a difficult call, but it's what needs to happen, and ultimately it's the cause of freedom that is a play here. And the last point I wanted to make was about funding, because, as you mentioned, too much money has gone to Iran, either directly or indirectly. I mean, the directly is just eye-popping, really, isn't it? I mean, look at the Nazarene Zaghari Radcliffe, hundreds of millions paid to Iran, essentially to free a single hostage, with the pretense that it was to do with a former contract, a former military contract. But why are you honouring a military contract with a dictatorship that's already chants and encourages its population and its military leadership to chant death to America, death to England? Yeah, well, okay, we'll pay you. Nonsense. And of course, all of the other funding through humanitarian causes, through UNRWA, through all the other global initiatives, through the UN generally, all of that is simply funding the enemy and encouraging the enemy to do what it did last night.
And the very least we should do in the West, if you don't want to be involved militarily, which would be a mistake anyway not to do it, it would be to put up such tight sanction, strangle the regime that is holding the Iranians enslavement effectively, and try and cut every single penny that goes into Iran to the regime. We know that within Iran there are lots of factions that don't care much for Islamism, and if we could, as I said, weaken the regime that keeps them under the cosh, we could see a regime change in Iran, and that would be, I can't imagine something worse than what we have now. So whatever regime change would probably be an improvement.
And the ripple effect of that would be huge across the Middle East and even as far as places like Venezuela.
And in terms of what you said about the Iranian people, I did see a statement was made by the former crown prince, son of the Shah who was deposed, who lives in exile in America now, who was applauding the defense of Israel and was calling for the Iranian people to rise up. I don't know how much of a figure of resistance he really is, because probably it's not like I suspect Iranians don't long for the days of the Shah. No. But that was, encouraging to see. And there was a lot of people who were tweeting things like, this was not an attack by Iran, it was an attack by the Islamic Republic. Now that's not quite right, but I appreciate the sentiment in the sense that, unlike with Gaza, what does seem to be the case with Iran is that there's a lot of unrest and active unrest amongst the populace with the government, as you guys were saying. So hopefully those people who go out and protest against the Iranian government, what we'll see by this is them in effect being very, very unhappy and in a sense ashamed of the actions of their own government, and this will galvanize them to further resistance. I think that's something we could only hope for. And I concur very much that the destruction needs to not only be of any nuclear sites, but also just of weapons factories, drone factories, whatever, to completely destroy their ability to arm themselves. Now, in terms of your question, Bonnie, the response that is being posted on Twitter, at least, is a bit vague, but it's probably necessarily vague because they're not going to telegraph exactly what they're going to do. But it's promising a very strong response. There was even a response from like the Israeli government's main Twitter account or something to the Ayatollah's tweet or something, saying you're really going to regret what you've just done. And that's in effect was what the whole messaging was suggesting, which is that they're going to pay for this and they're going to be very sorry that they've done this, which is right. And it's a bit vague, but that's fine at this point, I think. And then something else that I was saying to one of these jarheads, if that's the right term, idiots on Twitter, was that, I do think that the West needs to be militarily involved here. At the least, what they could do is sanctions, as you were saying. But, this is directly an attack on Israel, which is an attack on one of our allies. But Iran has been funding attacks through proxies on the West for decades. And even directly on American citizens in the form of the Iranian embassy crisis, if you want to go back to 1979. But in so many ways, Iran is the figure in the background behind 9/11, behind 7/7. All of this stuff, right? And not even just in terms of funding and training, but in the sense that they're the kind of figurehead for these Islamic radical movements. They take a lot of inspiration from them. And so taking out Iran would stop the funding and training, but would also, I think, be a demoralizing thing for these people. So I think that would be very positive. And in terms of what I said to one of these guys, because he was saying, American interests aren't at risk here, but they very much are. And they've been at risk ever since the West has been weak in the face of Iran for decades. And what I said to him was, look, good people will go and fight and die so that you can remain stupid on Twitter. So don't worry about it. Something will be done. And a response to this is demanded, at least by Israel. And Israel, although we criticize the Israelis for being not decisive enough in their response to Hamas, certainly in past iterations of the conflict here, and for delaying too much, I can only expect that the response here is going to be very, very strong. And if it's not, then that is utterly devastating. I don't see how Israeli citizens would put up with that for a single moment. So a response is demanded, and I think it will be delivered. And otherwise, that is the the real end of Israel, really. Was there anything? Oh, and actually, we have another super chat again from does code $5 New Zealand. Thank you. Who said, "Hey, I love your videos so much. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the far right people supporting Palestine as well as the anti-Semitism." Marco and Richard, any thoughts?
It's depressing to see the far right and the far left come together in the wrong, in the ways that they have, for different reasons, for deciding what they're against as much as what they're for in many cases, and that being what motivates some of them. But most of what motivates some of them is irrationality and a lack of reason and thinking in principles. It focuses on the wrong thing, and therefore misses the true picture. So I think it's not a surprise, but it's leading to a future where we're seeing two alternatives which look equally dire, and they look equally leading towards the wrong outcomes for the world. And that's why the importance of us offering an objective alternative and the clear moral clarity that we're trying to here is absolutely vital.
And also, the far right response is a bit different here in Europe than what it is in America. In America, it's mainly a religious-based, kind of irrational view of the whole conflict. Here in Europe, because of the massive Muslim immigration, we have lots of problems linked to Islam. We see lots of violence, we see lots of issues. So the far right here probably is focusing more, perhaps they are supporting Israel a bit more because mainly not because they're for Israel, but they're anti-Islam. So they see this kind of immediate difference, visual difference, perceptual thinking. So that they probably support Israel right now. Well, not necessarily support, but at least they're not openly against Israel. They're not openly anti-Semitic because they got another target in mind. But it's just a matter of time before they change. I mean, I don't think, typically anti-Semitism has been coming from the far right. However, it's become an infection that spread throughout the far left. So the two extremes are not exactly very good on the issue either. But yeah, it's as Richard said, it's basically boils down to a totally irrational way of seeing life.
Yes. I mean, in terms of the right in America, I think essentially that's coming around. I mean, and so much of this is because of tribalism, because they see people in the main. I mean, part of it is going to be anti-Semitism. That's part of why they're against Israel. But they see people in the mainstream supporting Israel, and basically they want to say, because they hate these guys, well, screw what they're in favor of, and that's why they want to go against it. And in terms of Jackson Hinkle, again, it's clear anti-Semitism, and I mean his whole brand of politics. I don't know if you guys have seen that. He calls it MAGA communism, a combination of the far left and the far right. So you might call it National Socialism, but I mean he's utterly despicable, and the amount of people who were voicing support for that kind of perspective on Twitter is just repulsive. It's hard to gauge how representative that opinion is, but certainly there's far, far too much of it. And in terms of the right here in Europe, I agree, Richard, that it's slightly more mixed than in the US. I mean, we've seen Nick Griffin, the former leader of the British National Party, i.e. the British Nazi Party, being very critical of Israel. But then last night as well, I saw a tweet by Tommy Robinson, who not everyone agrees with calling him far right, though I think he certainly flirts with those elements a bit too much or is a bit too comfortable with them, who was voicing support for Israel against Iran. So that's more encouraging. And as you say, it's harder for them to align themselves with the Palestinian cause because of its radical Islamist ideology. Whereas in the US, in the case of Jackson Hinkle and people like that, I think in effect, aside from the anti-Semitism, and they're proving these guys for attacking Jews and Israelis, I think what they really see and what they approve of is a determined militaristic, violent organizational states going at it who are theocratic. And I think that they see that and they feel some kind of approval there. Now they aren't going to like the Islam, but if you strip that away, the essential core of it for a lot of these people is kind of what they approve of. Now, not so much the mainstream conservative types who are being bad on this. I think they're just too non-interventionist and just want to stick their head in the sand. But for the real far right types, my guess is that's why they're bad on Israel and support these guys. And then just for the final part of your question, as well as the anti-Semitism, if you're asking what are our thoughts about anti-Semitism on the far right, well, they've got a bit of a history with this, don't they? So yeah, and unfortunately, anti-Semitism is creeping in from the radical fringes more into the mainstream, or is being refused to be identified by people in the mainstream as being anti-Semitism, again, sticking their head in the sand and giving credence to it, or just the old anti-Semitic tropes actually have more of a purchase on the mainstream kind of person's imagination than we would have thought for a long time. And that's my thoughts on it. Do you guys have any other thoughts on the anti-Semitism?
No, not really. I'm just looking forward to the anti-Hamas and anti-Iran protests here in London.
Yeah, I mean, how you can possibly end up on the side of Iran and think you're on the side of good defies belief. But this is a lot of evasion that's gone on for a long time, whether it's the anti-Semitism that existed throughout and has only been brought to light recently, or whether it's all of the regional geopolitics that we've seen coming to light recently. All of it's been there for a long time. It's been evaded for a long time, and it's necessary it's brought into the light, and therefore that things are coming to a head and chickens are coming home to roost, aren't they? And this is the only way that we will come out the other side of it. So in that sense, this is moving us forward.
Yes, and in terms of what you said before, Richard, the people we see either openly supporting Iran or criticizing Israel and saying, look, what other choice did Iran have? Evil people will declare their evil proudly to you, and they'll declare it in the form like this. And I think Owen Jones' tweet was just utterly disgusting. And it's incumbent upon people to recognize the evil when it's there. And a way you can notice it is these people always end up supporting the most evil, destructive people in the world consistently, whilst claiming that's not what they're doing. He followed it up with a tweet saying, look, you don't have to be an apologist for the Iranian regime. They're tyrants. Which even calling them tyrants, I feel like is a bit too soft. But they consistently end up doing this. And what is it in their worldview that ends up pushing them always to support the evil people at the expense of the good? Now, I mean, Ash Sarkar's statement was a bit stronger on that, whereas Jones's was a touch more wishy-washy. But I think that's the question you have to ask yourself. Why did they always end up doing this? It's because there's something really corrupt in their ideas and really deep down into their souls. But unless you guys have anything else to say, I guess we can wrap up because we've gone on a bit longer. Sure. Well, look, thank you very much for watching, everybody. It's not a cheery episode, I know, or a cheery topic, but serious times demand serious responses. And as I say, Razzie and James will be on later. They're going to be doing an extra long episode talking about all of this. Even by that time, just sort of 6 hours from now, we'll have more information. Things will be more settled. So make sure you tune in, ask lots of questions. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you guys all later. Bye-bye.